Team, today we're going to talk about this spectacular book called Selling Transformed. Develop the sales values which deliver competitive advantage. The author is Dr. Philip Squire, and he's joining us today from the UK. I'll give him a proper introduction in a few minutes. But I'm going to let you know a little bit about why I'm just incredibly excited to talk about this amazing book. So what Philip's done in Selling Transformed, he takes us through, first of all, very short history of professional selling. Very interesting, by the way, and some of the milestone selling books that have come before this, he touches on those. But it leads him to doing a dissertation in professional sales, and he identifies that most buyers aren't happy with the experience that they're getting from professional salespeople today. And of course, that aligns with lots of other research we've seen out there by Gardner and by CSO Insights and lots of others saying the buying experience isn't what it needs to be. They're not happy with what they're getting from professional sales today. Where I think Philip takes us in an amazing direction with this book is he goes in a different direction. He's not talking about sales process or methodologies. He ties it back to sales values or personal values, an alignment between sellers and buyers from a value perspective that will enable competitive differentiation and success. And he actually brings up some amazing examples throughout the book. The values that he focuses on, and you're going to love these, some we would expect, of course: authenticity, be yourself; client centricity, obviously put the customer first, but not just the customer. Understand them so well that you understand their entire ecosystem. Here's where they get great. Proactive creativity. So those among us who've been successful, proactive creativity, a key value, key attribute. And then here we go, tactful audacity. Okay, knowing how far to go. Tactful audacity. So we're going to talk to Philip about how we came up with these values of the 130 value examples he provides us. And then we're going to go today, hopefully, is talk a little bit about what Philip and team are doing to elevate sales to the profession it deserves to be. And they're making some amazing strides in the UK and other places. And I think this is so important for all of us that have dedicated our lives to professional sales. And it's really important for those just jumping into the profession, and there's lots of you. How do we feel better about what we're doing so that we see it as the profession it deserves to be? And in addition, we can be ourselves as long as we're the best version of ourselves and align our value systems professionally with those that we have personally. So I'm going to just give a proper introduction here to Philip. So Philip is Dr. Philip Squire is the CEO of Consalia. They're a sales consulting group based in Surrey out of the UK. And for 20 years, he's really just had an amazing CV of consulting for some of the largest, most successful sales organizations in the world, whether it's SAP or HP or Apple, Zurich, Royal Caribbean. The list of the top tier sales organizations out there are on the CV for Consalia. Now, Philip's a thought leader for something called the UK Trailblazer Undergraduate Apprenticeship in Professional Sales. He's also the co-founder of the International Journal of Sales Transformation. So without further ado, team, let's see if Philip's there to come on board and join us here. And let's give him all a wonderful welcome. There he is. Welcome, Philip. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you very much. I think I can go now, Mark.
Yeah, you absolutely.
I think you've summarized everything perfectly. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Well, Philip, first of all, just so great to have you here today. And I say thanks for joining us from the UK team. It'll start to get a little bit darker and darker over Philip's left shoulder as we're going through the conversation for the next hour here. So, Philip, I know you were at an event at the UK Stock Exchange late last week when we were exchanging some emails. What were you doing there? What was the event and how did it go?
The event was our 16th that we've run at the London Stock Exchange. It's very symbolic to us. that we're there. Sales is at the heart of driving economic activity, and so for us it's an annual pilgrimage. COVID notwithstanding, and over the years we've had some amazing themed events. So they're really a forum for thought leadership. You asked what we did on Thursday. The theme of Thursday's event is around relationship capitalization. And I think it's particularly relevant, I think, in these sort of COVID days in which that we're living. To what extent has the relationship capital that we built in our customers increased or decreased as a consequence of the digital sales environment in which we seem to be operating in? We had some really great speakers from different disciplines. I could spend quite a lot of time talking about what we covered, but I suppose if I were to put in a nutshell, what we were trying to achieve is that the value of the intangible assets of any business in the balance sheet for the value of client contracts is now greater than the value of the brand of the company. So if you start to analyze the value of intangible assets, you often find, whether it's Microsoft or some of these big companies, the value that's attached to the customer area is really important. Now we're arguing, and not arguing, we're exploring the idea of who does the valuation. You've got accountants doing the value. What do they know about client relationships? Well, they don't know a great deal. So I've been really interested to look at some of the metrics that they use, to put value. And I guess what the implications of this is if we can start to set the standard for client relationships, which could potentially find its way into the balance sheet, then that maybe could set a standard for how we look, particularly at our key accounts. And so that's what we were doing at the stock exchange on Thursday. We had some great speakers from the financial world talking about it. Some of the team that we've got together. We had SAP there, and we had ServiceNow there as well. Wow. So it was a great event, and it was great to get back in person, actually meeting people. I think that's what it's all about at the end of the day, at least to me.
Boy, a couple of great thoughts on that, but doesn't it feel good to start to be at events where you're seeing people and meeting people?
Yeah.
And, just as we were chatting before today's show, we were chatting with one of our teammates who was saying she'd been at a wedding on the weekend. So what a joy it would be to be there. But just re-engaging, we're now getting clients who are coming to us, Philip, saying, okay, as we're doing our planning for Q1 sales training and events and and so forth, they're going to be in person now. Yeah,
that's great. I think we've started to have seen that. The universities now are opening up the campuses here as well, but it's there's still a lot of hesitancy, I'd have to say. But let's hope next year we get back to some sense of normality, and you must come over to next year's GST event, Mark. We'll make sure you're invited.
I'll be delighted to be there. My dad's from Birmingham.
Oh, so, there you go.
Yeah.
So you have family over here. That's great.
So if only to pay homage to Aston Villa, we'll take any excuse.
Okay. Let's not talk about football at the moment.
No, let's not talk about Aston Villa. By the way, when you were chatting a little bit about the intangible value of relationships, how important, by the way, in terms of thinking of those organizations, enterprise software organizations, the lifetime value of a customer staggeringly high. Is this everything that gets bucketed into goodwill today? When you're working with the accountants and they're valuing these things, there's always this gray zone of goodwill, at least with North American finance.
Yeah, that's similar. And I mean, it's interesting. The only time that you can actually put a value on that is at the point at which a company is sold.
Right.
If you're a publicly quoted company, the difference between the share cap value represented by shares and the balance sheet value is often what goes into this big pot of customer relationships and
Right.
intangibles like the brand. So, I mean, clearly it's massive. You know, it's a massive source of value.
Yes.
But surprisingly, not that well, not that scientifically measured. And I think that's what we were really interested to explore is how do you do it? And now there's some very clever software, also coming from Canada, which enables us to look at relationship capital in a new way. The company is Intrahive, that we partnered with at this event. You may know them. Yeah.
Actually, we don't, but what a smart idea, because
it is.
Taking it downstream, if you can actually measure the value of that relationship financially, then I think that may be a trigger for change in terms of more investment in protecting that relationship.
Absolutely. You know, it's one of the biggest assets of a business. So, you know, you should nurture it, you should treasure it, you should make sure all your KPIs are measuring it. And so, yeah, it's terribly important, you know, particularly as 80% of revenue tends to come from the 20% of customers. So you can't afford to lose a big customer if you.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, Philip, of course, you talked about that a lot when we got into the key account management, you know, portions of the book and some of the great examples there. But, you know, as we convert to talk a little bit about selling transformed, let's talk about, you know, the impetus for writing the book in the first place and your journey, you know, through the assignment and then the dissertation. Tell us a little bit about what triggered this book for you.
Well, if you're looking at a sort of an order of events, it didn't. The book came after the research and some years after. And it was quite a fortuitous journey. You know, it started with in the gardens of Hampton Court Palace with a conversation with a lecturer at one of our London universities who overheard a conversation I was having about research, and he said, "Why don't you turn that into a doctorate?" And yeah, I'd never went to university. I didn't regard myself as being an academic in any way, but I'd always wanted to do something that used my brain a bit more. And I didn't realize that you could go straight into doing a doctorate without doing an undergraduate, postgraduate degree. You have to go through quite a few hoops to get to that acceptance for the doctorate program. Okay. So yeah, it just started complete by chance, and it coincided with some research we're doing with Hewlett Packard, which I talk about in the book a bit, where they'd asked us to go and interview some of their customers about how their customers wanted to be sold to. Mm-hmm. And really the response from those initial interviews were the spark that provoked. It's really become a life work, I suppose you could say. It's just amazing how in life these small things can trigger big things, isn't it?
You know how amazing it is in life that saying yes to things triggers you down a path you'd never imagined, but it started by saying yes.
Yeah.
And, you know, getting that assignment and you know, starting to conduct the research and authentically living in the moment, it leads you down a path. Boy, that's certainly something I try and continue to work on in my life, Philip, is just start with yes.
Yeah. Well, I think that's right. I think life deals you certain cards, and you play the cards, you play the deck, and sometimes the cards you get played aren't particularly attractive. And sometimes are good, but yeah, I completely agree. It's sort of being in the moment, and I guess to some extent following a certain degree of intuition as well.
And so as part of that, you know, that assignment, led you down this path to what you call a crisis in sales, identifying what this crisis in sales, where you came back and said, you used some very specific examples from some important business leaders, giving very direct feedback about what a low percentage of salespeople were adding value.
Yeah,
Tell us a little bit about that.
it's really interesting. I mean, first of all, the level of people that I was interviewing were quite. There were sort of management and very senior management level execs across a whole range, eventually across a whole range of sectors and in different parts of the world. No one ever refused an interview. So that told me that customers cared, and they're quite passionate about the relationship that they have with salespeople.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that was great. You obviously had an open door pretty much to senior execs who terribly busy people, and they care about the relationships they have with their key suppliers. And so that was good. Tick that box. They care about something, but the emotion through which they expressed their, what turns them off,
Mm-hmm.
took me by surprise. And I did wonder at the very beginning if I just happened to choose upon the 2 or 3, customers out there who were born to be difficult and awkward. But that didn't prove the case, because, I think the very first person I interviewed, when I asked the question, what percentage of salespeople sell in the way you want, he said, oh, 90% are a complete waste of time. No, maybe 95%. So it was a bit of an ouch moment. And the second one said about 10% of salespeople, are in that. We've begun to call this the winner's circle.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only initial 2 or 3, but eventually I think as part of the doctorate, over about 80 people. I mean, obviously my client, who was HP at the time, were concerned with this feedback.
Right. Absolutely.
So they said, Phil, would you mind going across to America? I went with HP and then some other major sort of multinationals who began to hear about it. And it really led me to this burning platform that I think we have, which is, according to customers, they don't have a great impression of salespeople. So this is something that we need to change, I think, in the profession. Yeah.
Towards the end of our chat today, I'll ask some questions about, are we to blame for that? Or is that a little bit of the history and, some stereotypes that come our way? Are we any different than some other professions like law?
Yeah.
Where, because there's so much out there today, but just staying on that path of the challenge or this crisis in sales that you picked on. How did we end up going back to this value system? You talk about, although I'm not deep in it, Julian Birkinsaw's framework and so.
Oh yeah. It was there was a very low moment, I would say, in the research, and it happened after a couple of years, and I decided to bring together a group of buyers and sellers in the same room. And I was very lucky to be able to work with Professor George Yip, who was then at London Business School, written multiple books on global account management and so on. And so he and I were in this room in London and with this group of about 20 people, and we're looking at the data, and then we're saying, well, let's what framework do we need to build that will then put us into the winner's circle, the 10%. And the low moment was looking at the data and looking at what was written up there on the flip charts, and actually thinking, do you know something? There's nothing new in here at all.
Right. Okay.
Because they talk about, salespeople need to listen, and they need to ask the right questions, and they need to have commercial acumen. They need to be resilient. All of these kind of things that had come up that we knew, we'd seen it before. And I know that companies are investing huge sums of money on these kind of topics. And the low moment was actually I'd gone through 2 years of research and come up with nothing new. So I can tell you that was fairly soul destroying. but it coincided with one of my lecturers at the university who was talking about bias and the different lenses through which you can see data, and how much your bias influences how you see stuff. And we began this then discussion about values. And I realized that when we started talking about values at a personal level, I'd never seriously considered what they were. I think we go through life quite often, or certainly I did, sort of you don't really reflect on what they are. And I began to realize that this is kind of the operating system under which your behavior follows. And, this light bulb went off, both in the way that I was looking at the data, but then I said, well, if I look at the huge amount of data I collected from these customers, and I looked at what were they really saying from a values perspective, I actually found that a lot of the time they were talking about values directly, even though I was not looking for it. And when you do your literature research, when you start to look at what academics are researching on the topic of sales effectiveness, I realized that no one had really explored this topic in detail. And I began to get excited because to me, the logic is so beautifully simple.
Agreed.
That if you live certain values, whatever they are, that's how you're going to be. It's going to influence everything you do, how you behave, how you act. And the hypothesis then was, well, what are the values, both positive and negative? And is it possible for people to adapt or adopt values? And can we measure that? Can we measure the performance improvement from people who live them? So that became the second half of my doctorate, and it was a bit happier than the first half because I felt we were breaking into some really new territory, new ground, and both myself and the customers we were working with at the time felt the same way.
Well, this is where your work touched me personally. I'll call it out, Philip. Why I was so excited to get you as a guest here today, because we've all seen those people in life that just you engage with them and you leave and you just think to yourself, that person is doing what they were born to do. They're happy in their own skin. And what I've noticed in professional sales is a great deal of the time, particularly on some younger team members in professional sales, there's a disconnect between what they think they're supposed to be doing professionally and their own personal value system. And I love this idea of, hey, let's align. First of all, it takes away from authenticity when that's happening. They have a veneer and nobody wants to engage with somebody who's inauthentic. And then secondly, they're just conflicted. They just don't feel comfortable in their own skin. And nobody wants to engage with somebody like that either. They're not going to perform at their peak there. I love this idea of going to this value system and then driving the values so that we can actually also identify organizations that we as professional salespeople want to join, because we should be asking them what their value systems are. No one ever asks this in an interview. This never comes up. You never get a candidate going, tell me about the values of the company. So I think this is how we, without this crazy churn and transition taking place in professional sales today, I think everybody watching this, whether it's the podcast or what have you, think about your own value system. And I know there's an exercise in Chapter 7 to do that. And then ask the next employer you're considering, what are their values? How do they want to treat their customers? How does that pervade the sales organization, if not the entire company? But incredibly powerful stuff. And then you landed on these 4 values that can provide some of this, competitive differentiation, meaning these are the values that buyers want to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And you summarized those at the very beginning of the talk. It was yeah, we spent a lot of time. I was just looking at my dissertation actually before
Oh, okay.
the call, and I looked at the timelines of actually getting to those four, and it took sort of 18 months because we were
Wow.
constantly, we were saying that, is authenticity the right word, or should it be integrity? The tactful audacity, which I love, like you, I just, that really hit true. Again, it takes a long time to come up with sometimes simple frameworks. But yeah, I mean, it was an just an amazing journey to get to these four that worked and four that didn't, and that's the result of 4 years work. The end of 4 years you come up with four things that you actually think might make a little bit of an impact on the sales profession.
But hey, power to you, Philip, because there's a saying that's attributed to Mark Twain, but he didn't say it.
Okay.
It's actually a physicist who came up with this, who originally came up with this. But anyway, the saying is, hey, I wrote you a long letter. If I had more time, I would have written you a short letter. And so you took that to the nth degree, taking the 4 years, but the power is in the simplicity of the shorter list. And let's talk about, by the way, I really do love tactful audacity. I think it's one of my operating principles generally, but the authenticity. So starting there, the quality of being real and true. So let's expand on that a little bit for the audience today.
Well, you kind of raised a very, you talked about sort of being comfortable in your own skin. And, there's a lot of people that go through life who never quite know what skin they should be living in. And, for me, the reflection that I went through as I was doing the doctorate, and in terms of actually looking at what I felt my core personal values were, and the impact that would, the reasons that those values, not the reasons, but the impact those values had on my career, my chosen career, was massively important. And when we start working with salespeople and sales leaders on our master's programs or undergraduate programs, that's where we start. We start with our first module, 3 days. All we do is we start to explore this whole notion of who we are, coupled with reflection. And I talked earlier about bias. I think the problem that we have sometimes is that we don't understand what influences our perception of ourselves, which can distort our conclusions. So, and it's often it's one of the most transformational modules we have. And you don't normally see that in any kind of sales curriculum, right? We're going to start looking at values. We're going to we don't want a superficial, yes, family integrity, or whatever it might be. We want to do a really deep dive on it, because you talked earlier about conflict, and we call it living contradictions. Is that unless you do what is aligned to your personal values, you're going to be unhappy at some point. And if you're unhappy, you therefore won't be motivated, you won't be passionate, and customers will sense it, because they're looking for your values. And they're not just looking at what they see as your behavior, they're looking for the values that you're demonstrating and how you work and the person you are. So authenticity, the Greek word, I mean, it's also about being original. So what we liked about the word authenticity was the sense of being original, unique. It wasn't just being someone that we can trust. It's this original, the authentic Levi jeans, I think was the first, saying around the jeans, So yeah, so that is what drove authenticity. And, it's terribly important, and it's where we start, finding your authentic self.
And you do 3 days on that.
Well, yeah, we get them to go through exercises that reflect on themselves. We do different exercises. We give them reflection techniques. So we teach people how to think, just so because they need to understand the filters for which they see data. So we spend time looking at reflective techniques. We then share with them the research and what customers have said, through videos. And we then get them to think about the connecting of their personal values with the customer values, and deciding, almost never, I'm not in the right career. But, sales is such a wonderful profession to be in, and it, for those that are interested in finding solutions for customers, being creative, a lot of the customer values, I think, speak to a lot of people. It's that they're not just related to sales. You could apply these values, I think, almost to any role.
You could. Well, and you make the connection in with Simon Sinek and why, and
that's right.
Of course, the biases that we all battle, from Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, still to this day, the toughest read. Any MBA book I ever had to motor through was easy compared to Thinking Fast and Slow. That's the hardest book I've ever.
I love that book too.
I love it. But, on a personal note, Philip, I would absolutely call out that my first couple of years selling photocopiers 25 years ago, maybe 30, it was, looking back now, was a dream job. So that was the only technology around at the time. That was the technology. Great company, Kodak, treated everybody wonderfully. They valued the profession of sales. And deep down, two things: being in my low 20s, I wanted a veneer because my personal life of staying up late and carousing and drinking, I just thought I was such a mess that I had to have this veneer.
Right.
Nothing's changed on the staying up late and carousing. But now I'm a little more open about it. But walking around because again, the profession, I fell into it and really needed almost no credentials to get into it.
Yeah.
Whereas, my friends who were articling students with law firms, or really just being brutalized in the financial sector because they had an MBA and there were interns, and their lives were so incredibly unpleasant compared to mine professionally. Yeah. I didn't realize it.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's a very interesting, I get to see the different businesses and travel around, learn about different things. It was really such a joy, but I wasn't connecting the dots on why. And it was, when I stood back and did that it all started becoming a joy. Yeah. So there was authenticity. Let's talk a little bit about you've got amazing examples of some courage by some companies, by the way, when you talk about client centricity, value number 2. So not just knowing the client, but knowing that whole ecosystem.
Yeah, knowing the whole ecosystem. And I think that, it's not the client, but it's the client's customers that are important, or in some cases, their suppliers, depending on the nature of the sector that they're in. So this became, obviously what customers are saying is, it's absolutely critical that you understand, not just our business, but the world in which we operate, our context. And you can often see salespeople make rather superficial attempts to really understand that market. I was really struck by Hennessy and what was the other gentleman's name? They were both at IMD. Was it Jeannet? Yeah, Jeannet and Hennessy. Hennessy is at Babson in the USA. Two academics sort of writing about cracking the industry code. And they really set the bar fairly high, and what I felt salespeople needed to do. And when we were working with HP in the early days, where we'd taken the mindsets, we'd taken the research, and we said to HP, we had a control group looking at these large deals, and we said, how do we take client centricity and put it on steroids? And then we said, well, these deals were pretty big. There were $20 million plus deals that we're working on. And we actually said, well, who can give us an MBA on this client in about an hour? And we said analysts, and industry analysts. They're talking to CEOs all the time.
Yeah.
So we invited, the Morgan Stanleys of this world and other analysts to come in and talk to us for an hour. Then they're not supposed to do this as part of their normal day job. But we decided to, we said, look, we'll put money into a charity of your choice. So we used whatever we could to try and get them to participate. And actually, they were incredible. And that really enabled the sales teams to get an edge on the context and the customer situation, business-wise, and also the characters of the main board. People are making these big decisions. So, so essentially, client centricity, it's something we're always taught, to do. But what we did was say, well, whatever we've been taught, how can we do it more and in more detail? And of course, now with the internet and all the search engines, we now have access to huge amounts of information. So yeah, there's no excuse not to do it.
Thank you for the last comment. With the access to information, you would think there's no excuse not to do it, but it's actually not done.
Correct.
And, most of my background was kind of mega deals. So 10, hundreds, I did $1 billion deal.
Wow.
So knowing the customer was so critically important, and they can tell they have no time to educate you on their business.
Correct.
If you haven't done 3/4 of the work. And team, one of the things I'm going to call out to everybody watching or listening today, if you do large account management or key account management today, actually buying, selling, transformed only for, I think it was in chapter 8, there are samples of how to do the size up on the business you're selling to. Fantastic models, incredibly straightforward and simple. Then Philip suggests, hey, do the work and then share it with your client and say, are we on the right page here?
Yeah.
First of all, reading through that, I was picking up a different way of doing a size up on a business that I thought was magnificent, but it's really a beautiful how-to in terms of getting that perfect, full view of the ecosystem. Team, go and get this book. Just for that alone will help your big deal teams. So really.
I think you're referring to the strategy grid. It is an amazing, tool. And I think collaboration in this is so important. And it's also part of building trust. And the idea of sharing it with the customer, getting them to fill in the boxes where you can't, is just a great way to give them comfort that you really understand the business challenges. So thank you for referring to that.
Well, I just thought it was just incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
So value number 4, proactive creativity, literally bringing things, helping that client get to a better future that they hadn't thought of getting to.
I think this is really important you mentioned Julian Birkinshaw earlier on, and I've been hugely influenced by him talking about the post-knowledge era and agility and democracy and how companies have to be so quick to change. And of course, they don't know all the answers. The great advantage that we have as salespeople, like you were mentioning earlier, Mark, is that, we see across different sectors. We see what different customers are doing with some of the solutions that we might have developed for them before. Your insight and knowledge is of huge help. And the time is not on their side because, the things, like I said, move so quickly. So proactive creativity is really a value that they look for in salespeople. Rarely seen. I see a lot of creativity sometimes, but it's reactive. Like customer says,
right?
Got this new idea. Can we do something? This is where customers are saying we love it when a salesperson, unsolicited, comes to us with an idea that we haven't thought of. But of course, it has to be grounded on authenticity and client centricity. You can't just do it cold, in my view.
Right.
Unless you're lucky, happen to come up with the right idea at the right time. But
you also have to have that credibility with them or earn it in a short period of time.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's hard to do sometimes, but yeah, you're right. If if there's a fortuitous meeting of time and idea, and yeah, it can be done, but it's pretty rare. It's pretty rare to be able to do that without some sort of connection. You have to earn the right to be trusted. It takes time to do that.
some of those large organizations that you've had the pleasure of working with, they'll put together MBA teams of people called value engineers.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
they'll kind of assess the financial and strategic positioning of certain businesses and identify KPIs that are out of whack, and give the point of view to the enterprise sales rep to lead with a
Correct.
senior executive.
Yeah.
But they're facts.
Yeah.
And again, it's based on, it's based on the research and understanding that business. And those MBA teams are almost at the level of analysts.
Correct.
Understanding certain industries. So it's such a smart way of getting in there.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this last one, Philip. And this will be close to my heart because I'm not sure I have the tactful part down, or at least my wife would tell you maybe I don't have the tactful part down. The art of knowing how far to go without going too far. Apparently, I have a problem with the second piece, particularly around home. But the art of knowing how far to go without going too far, tactful audacity. What a skill today.
Yeah, this is having the courage to be bold. And it's the tact is really important, because you don't want to upset people by coming across as being too opinionated. But you need to have the audacity, which is going to be reflected in the passion with which you are suggesting they do something, even if it might not be what they asked you for. And the tactful audacity value came to me as a consequence of interviewing Starbucks. Mm-hmm. And out in Seattle, and I interviewed the Starbucks team, and it was originally Compaq and then HP, because HP bought Compaq at the time this deal was being done. And I just love the audacity of Starbucks, who sort of issued this RFP for technology vendors to invest in the internet cafe concept in Starbucks, which they reckoned would cost them $100 million for free. I love the story and the creativity that it drove. Eventually HP won it. Love the creativity it drove, but I left the interview thinking, well, what if the account teams actually thought of the problem before Starbucks did?
Right.
And for me, I then came back to, well, therefore, what values do you need to have to drive that kind of thinking? And this reinforced the proactive creativity value. And then having the audacity to take that and put it across the desk of someone like Starbucks. I could have saved them millions of dollars if the account team had come up with the idea before they did.
Exactly right.
Rather than invest the 60 million, which they eventually did to get the deal.
Right.
But it's great. And we've lived off that, and that's where the fun is. The fun is all of these values coming together at the point you're putting your solution across to customers.
Well, we always like trying to define sales right at the start of our training, Philip, because we think people are getting confused.
Okay.
And there's lots and lots of reasons for that. Some of it are the internet platitudes, the 3-minute videos, which are supposed to teach somebody how to sell professionally. But at the end of the day, we just think, selling is about solving a significant problem for a customer in a way that's mutually beneficial for them and for you.
Yeah.
If you identify that problem first and have that discussion about getting them to a better future, can you imagine the strength and the positioning before we always say before anybody goes to RFP, you write the RFP because you came up with the idea. You're in a position then to protect some of the things you need to protect, margin and profitability, make sure it works mutually beneficial.
Correctly. Yeah.
But, but it changes everything, but it takes time and it takes creativity. And maybe in some sales environments, I don't have that time because I've got this incessant pressure of the quarterly number. So I'm only looking at the deals that are at the bottom of my funnel and, trying to close those rather than building for the future.
Right.
And I'll say some of the organizations where I had the privilege of doing some of the largest deals and largest transactions, the reason they ended in a positive way is the organization wasn't used to doing those kinds of mega deals. So there wasn't this timeline that said, you better bring this in 8 months. You better bring it in 6. Those kind of deals take 1.5 years, 2 years. One of them took 7 or 8 months just to negotiate once they, decided on us. So some of that leeway enabled us to keep all the internal pressure off of the client so we could continue to let them know we were trying to get them to a better future. And it wasn't about me hitting my quarterly number, me hitting my profit goal. And when they had that trust, then we could collaboratively work together, even though it was still bumpy getting there. So I think sometimes these environments we're creating, all these wonderful values you're talking about, as sales leaders, we need to think about how do we insulate our teams from some of these inherent pressures to allow them to behave that way so that they feel safe to behave that way and that they're not just trying to pitch a product, get a lead, try and close it before the end of the quarter. You've touched on leadership in the book as well, Philip. And the one thing, there's a lot of folks who will be listening to this who might be CEOs of mid-market companies, and they kind of play a bit of a role as a sales leader, or they're sales leaders in larger organizations. And as you've probably seen, CSO Insights, Gardner, they're always talking about what sales leaders are dealing with. And for about the last 5 or 6 years, they always ask this question of, around 2,000 of the top sales leaders in the US, what's your number one priority? It comes back at transforming the sales organization. And the irony of this is it's always the same. So you think, hey, isn't a transformation a one-time thing? And they say, for the last 6 or 7 years, that keeps becoming the number one thing. They're saying I'm in this constant state of transformation. You in the book, you do I have an interesting way of defining the difference between change and transformation. And then you talk about some of the leadership qualities required at the sales leader level to enable transformation. Do you mind sharing a little bit of that?
Sure. I mean, you're touching upon such an important topic, which could be almost another podcast.
Our next podcast.
Another webinar. But managers play a critical role in creating an environment that allows these values to flourish. And you mentioned perhaps earlier that culture eats strategy for breakfast, and leadership is so. Leadership, is very much involved in that cultural domain. Where do we start with this one? The value, what values do sales leaders need to have? From our experience, a lot of the perhaps poorer practices are caused because leaders themselves, they've been through a certain sales training system that kind of reinforces habits that we would call manipulative, the specific types of questioning techniques, perhaps, or whatever. Yeah. So the role that managers have in sort of believing that there could be a different way of doing things is so essential. So a lot of the work that we find ourselves now doing, and we have master's programs now that we're running in the UK for sales leaders around leading sales transformation, is very much geared to what values and attributes do the leaders need to have. Most leaders manage by we call it tactical sales management systems, quarterly
Yes.
driven, all the things you talked about.
Yeah.
Transformation is a different system you need to have. And we talk about that a little bit in the book, but we probably don't have too much time to talk about it now, unless you want to go into some detail.
Or unless I want to go into your dinner hour, which I absolutely don't want to do. But we'll, next time we'll bring, for sure, Philip will bring you back, and we'll speak almost exclusively on that topic of sales management as this kind of X factor, I think, of elevating, sales performance today.
Yeah.
But correct me if I'm wrong. I think you touched on a couple of key kind of mindsets or values of, a great leader having that vision.
Oh, yeah. Vision, desire to be the best. Yeah. Vision, desire to be the best. So empowerment and potential as being the 4 values. And that was based on research we did with 200 managers across Europe. Again, we were trying to distill it into these, to something simple.
Yeah.
And vision is not the company vision. This is the Simon Sinek vision. Right. This is the why. What is the why of what we do in our sales team? And that's really important for getting the winning hearts and minds, because desire to be the best is all about the sort of standards that you want to send. If you don't have clear standards in what we would say in the right areas, you're going to have a problem. And then, of course, you've got this ability to empower salespeople and recognize potential in people as being, key factors that, from the research we did, sort of makes great leaders stand out. But in the current world in which we live, I think that there's some other attributes that have surfaced that go beyond those 4 in the book, to do with the ability to deal with ambiguity, uncertainty, and so on. But let's leave that for another time, Mark. I think.
Absolutely. Well, team. So just in summary, I'm going to ask Philip in a second how people get in contact with you. But I will just touch out, folks, as everybody who listens to these podcasts or webinars knows, I have growth orientation. I'm on a lifelong learning journey. I love books on sales. This one immediately went to, the top of my list. And I think if you want to understand, how you can jump in today and not only feel better about your profession yourself, because it is a profession, but secondly, make those around you better. This is an excellent, it's both a strategic, psychological benefits, also a framework in many cases, like the key account management, size up models. I'd pick up this book very, very quickly, Selling Transformed, and I've absolutely loved it. Philip, it has been just a great pleasure meeting you. So on behalf of everybody associated in our community, I just want to say thank you very much for joining. How do people get in contact with you if they'd like to learn more? Assuming we can buy the book on Amazon, but how else can we? I
think, or the publisher, Kogan Page. It can be in the UK. We have retail chains such as Waterstones and Foyles as well. But I think Amazon is probably not a bad place to go. And Kogan Page themselves. Yeah.
Kogan Page. Got it.
Yeah.
And what about on the professional side of your business, the sales enablement coaching, the sales consulting? How do folks get in touch with you? Is it through your LinkedIn page?
Yeah, just LinkedIn, or, reach out on the website. There are multiple opportunities for people to make contact, and it will be a pleasure to obviously meet you or talk more about it. And there's also the ability for those that are interested in the mindsets and the values we talk about to have access to a mindset survey where you can actually survey yourself against the mindsets. Doesn't cost anything. Yeah, give that a go. And if you want more information, you have a chance to ask us if, to reach out to you. Yeah, so there's multiple opportunities. Yeah.
And we find that through, what's the web address for that, or the website?
Well, if you go to the consalia.com website, then and look at, and then search for Mindset Survey, you'll find it you'll get to the landing page.
Fantastic.
You'll find it there.
So team, those on the webinar today, in our summary email to you, we're going to put a link to that Consalia website so you can go and do your mindset test. Those of you hearing this at a later date can always go out to info@inthefunnel.com, and we will make sure you get the link to Philip's test online. Philip, thank you so much. I hope we get a chance to do this again. It's been an absolute pleasure meeting you.
It's been an absolute pleasure meeting you, Mark, and thanks so much for taking an interest.
My pleasure indeed. Team, thank you all for listening. As always, we really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed what you heard today, don't hesitate to give us a Google review. Those all matter. And in the meantime, hoping everybody in the funnel team is wishing everybody out there that you're healthy and happy and safe and emerging stronger from these turbulent times. Bye for now, everybody.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Philip. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.